you, Stacy. Our fourth speaker is Caitlain Tinker, and the title of her project is Contesting the Marginalization of Female Leadership in Sports, Women's Struggle for Equal Opportunities in men's collegiate and professional basketball. In this feminist critique, Caitlain Tinker interrogates the discourses and practices of gender discrimination in men's supported institutions in the United States. The study focuses on delineating and naming the discriminatory ideologies that are produced by dominant social and cultural institutions, revealing in the process how these practices determine gender equality in the professional and collegiate supporting field. To this end, Tinker performs a post-structuralist discourse analysis of what Louis Althusser calls the dominant ideological state apparatuses, namely schools, the media, and supporting institutions. She argues that these institutions come together to form a network of power that produces and reinforces patriarchal discourses and practices that are not only problematic and contradictory, but also act as social barriers that restrict women from obtaining leadership position in sports. Here, Tinker focuses on the category and experience of the head coach as revelatory of contradictory forms of gender discrimination, marginalization, and misrepresentation that exist in men's supporting institutions, especially in the National Basketball Association and the National Collegiate Athletic Association. This study, drawing as it does on critical post-structuralist feminist frameworks, also seeks to contest and subvert the deeper social forces and cultural discourses that promote the phenomenon of institutionalized gender discrimination in sports. Last but not least, Caitlain Tinker.
This research project examines the discourses and practices of gender discrimination in men's professional and collegiate sporting institutions in the United States. I focus on delineating and naming the discriminatory ideologies that are reproduced by dominant social and cultural institutions, revealing in the process how these practices determine gender equality in the professional and collegiate sporting field. Through Foucauldian discourse analysis with influence from Althusser, I argue that these institutions together produce and reinforce patriarchal standards that are problematic because they reveal underlying patterns of discrimination against women and act as restricting social barriers, preventing women from obtaining certain positions of leadership, predominantly in men's sports. Based on the literature and data collected on men's basketball in the United States, this study focuses on the position of the head coach through the use of contemporary examples that demonstrate the forms of gender discrimination, marginalization, and misrepresentation that exist within sporting organizations like the National Basketball Association and the National Collegiate Athletic Association. While practices of gender inequality have historically existed within sporting institutions, there are other institutions that play a significant role in constructing underlying ideologies and practices of gender discrimination that support the marginalization and exclusion of women from high-ranking leadership positions, one of which being the schooling institution. The schooling institution can be identified as what Louis Althusser describes as an ideological state apparatus. As an ISA, the school institution acts as a dominant structure that contributes to the creation and reproduction of dominant ideas and ideologies. Althusser describes the school as a place where children, in addition to learning academic skills, learn, quote, the rules of good behavior, i.e. the attitude that should be observed by every agent in the division of labor according to the job he is destined for, rules of morality, civic, and professional conscience, which actually means rules of respect for the socio-technical division of labor, and ultimately the rules of the order established by class domination. This indicates that within this structure, children learn at a young age what is considered to be acceptable behavior and what is not. In this same respect, children are exposed to the gender divisions of labor, accepting the normalization of who comprises what positions of authority. Ultimately, over time, through the reproduction of certain practices, gendered ideological signifiers and meanings are attached to these positions. As a result, certain jobs within school administration are perceived as masculine while others as feminine. These ideological formations can be seen through an examination of the statistics surrounding the gender composition of schooling administration. Although women make up 76% of all teaching positions and hold 50% of all principal positions, when it comes to the higher level leadership positions, such as superintendent, state superintendent / commissioner of education, and U.S. Secretary of Education, women appear to be significantly underrepresented. 2011 statistics show that only 12 of the 50 largest school districts have female superintendents, while there are only 17 state superintendents / commissioners of education, and there have only been 2 U.S. Secretaries of Education. These statistics demonstrate the existence of a systematic, institutionalized gender hierarchy that children within these institutions are ultimately exposed to during their time in school. As R.W. Connell describes in Teaching the Boys, New Research on Masculinity and Gender Strategies for Schools, a common pattern that exists within schooling institutions is the association of masculinity with authority, where in some cases a concentration of men hold positions of authority and superiority. Therefore, certain ideologies and practices of masculine dominance are maintained by schooling institutions and allow for the pupil to view these ideologies as social facts. By confronting gender-based discriminatory practices and ideologies that exist within the schooling institution, it becomes apparent that schools need to make significant structural changes within its administrative and executive composition in order to actually demonstrate the notion of equality and equal opportunities to its pupils. This could impact the way that children perceive gender roles later on in life, particularly when it comes to involvement in sports. Additionally, the social agents within these institutions need to consider redefining the ways boys and girls in sports are celebrated, ideally in ways that don't express favoritism or importance of one over the other. In this section, I critically analyze the information on gender diversity that is found in the 2011 Racial and Gender Report Card for the NBA. Created by Richard Lapchick for the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport, also known as TIDES, and meant to be a true representation of gender and racial diversity within this organization, this study uses a grading scale where the institutions and the employment categories within these institutions receive a grade of A through F. I argue that not only is this study inconsistent and selective, but the media articles written about this report card are creating false representations of gender equality in the NBA. This study was done on several different professional sporting organizations in the United States. Each organization receives its own grade based on gender and racial composition of its employees. In comparison to other organizations like the NFL, the NHL, and the MLB, the NBA actually did receive a better grade than these institutions with an overall A- for gender diversity. However, when examined more closely, the data found in this study reveals that the NBA actually doesn't have as much gender diversity as the report card and many other mass media outlets claim. The main thing about this report card that I consider to be problematic is the way that grades were assigned to each employment category. The categories each contain a brief description of the job and the job's titles included within, along with a comparison of the statistics from previous years. At the end of each description, a grade was assigned under the categories of race and gender. According to the grading scale guidelines provided by the report itself, for gender, an A was assigned if more than 40% of its employees were women, B for 32%, C for 27%, D for 22%, and F for anything lower than 22%. The problem here is that the study chose to include race and gender grades for positions included under the categories of League Central Office, which received an A at 42%, Senior Administration, which received a C at 27%, Professional Administration, which received an A- at 39%, and Team Vice President, which received an F at 15%. At the same time, grades for gender were completely excluded from the categories of head coach, assistant coach, CEO/president, and general manager. Upon further investigation into the statistics provided at the end of the NBA study, there are 0 female head athletic trainers, general managers, head coaches, assistant coaches, and only 2 CEOs/presidents. Interestingly enough, all of these positions were assigned grades for the gender category in the 2012 Racial and Gender Report Card for the WNBA. Based on the numbers and grading scale provided by this study, I questioned why grades for gender were not assigned to certain positions, positions that coincidentally have almost no female representation. Although there are no details that reveal the calculations needing to be done to determine the overall percentage, reaching at least a 40% to receive an A, how can the only two categories given A grades for gender diversity in the NBA qualify this organization to receive an overall grade of an A- when the only other two categories that were included under gender received a C and an F? Additionally, if this study included the 5-0 percentages coming from the positions that weren't assigned gender grades, wouldn't the overall percentage and grade be significantly lower than the 40% required to receive an A? Has the underrepresentation of women holding these exclusively male positions become so naturalized that it becomes acceptable to completely avoid the identification and interrogation of this problem? More importantly, does this organization even recognize this as a problem? Through an examination of the news articles published about this report card, it becomes clear that TIDES is not the only organization that disregards identifying the lack of female representation in coaching positions. Upon examining two news articles, one from ESPN and one from USA Today, reporting on the NBA's leadership in diversifying professional American sports, the importance placed on gender diversity seems to be significantly downplayed in comparison to the examination of racial composition. This article fails to mention anything about the lack of female representation in the positions of head coach, assistant coach, and general manager. In the articles, both authors tend to focus their discussions on racial diversity while completely avoiding mention of the total exclusion of women from these positions. These types of practices within sports media create problematic ideological representations of where women are perceived to belong in professional sports. These representations marginalize the importance of female leaders in men's sports and reinforce subjectivities that misrepresent the things that women are able to achieve career-wise in professional basketball. For decades, this organized sporting institution has played a significant role in the construction of hegemonic ideologies about masculinity. It is argued by Michael Messner in Sports and Male Domination, the Female Athlete as Contested Ideological Terrain, that in many ways, organized sport has come to serve as the primary institutional means for sustaining the faltering ideology of male superiority in the 20th century. Through active practices of hegemonic masculinity, these organizations are allowed to uphold these faltering ideologies that impact the sports work environment through certain hiring practices that are concordant with the theory of homologous reproduction. Cantor first conceptualized the theory of homologous reproduction in 1977. It predicts, quote, that a dominant group will strive to carefully guard power and privilege by systematically reproducing themselves in their own image, end quote. In this case, men are typically hired by other men to serve in coaching positions within these organizations because the perception of their gender role is congruent to those doing the hiring. This theory is undeniably represented within men's basketball, both on the professional and collegiate levels. In the NBA, women represent 0% of both head coaches and assistant coaches, while in the NCAA, 0.1% of assistant coaches. On the contrary, current statistics show that as of 2012, males make up 48% of coaches and 36% of assistant coaches in the WNBA. In women's NCAA basketball for the 2007-2008 season, 42.6% of head coaches and 34.2% of assistant coaches were male. This exemplifies problems surrounding the fact that men continue to cross over and get offered positions coaching both men and women, while women are marginalized from receiving such positions and their authority continues to be minimalized in sports as a whole. Although the theory of homologous reproduction can be applied to both organizations, I argue that it is implemented on a stricter, more exclusive level into the men's basketball division. When it comes to finding equal opportunity for females leading men's sports teams, there is still a very long way to go in breaching and eventually eliminating the social barriers that restrict women from certain leadership positions. As I demonstrated in this analysis, it is not the sole responsibility of a single institution, but multiple institutions, all of which play a significant role in the formation and reproduction of patriarchal ideologies and practices that limit female leadership in men's sports and create patterns of gender discrimination. If changes are to take place, they must be evaluated through a larger context at the institutional level. I suggest that institutions and their social agents must first be able to recognize that there are many underlying discriminatory practices that take place within. The institutions must stop hiding behind the false pretenses of gender diversity within their organization and address these problematic issues that go on within them. The head coaching position in basketball is something that women have proven they are more than capable of excelling at, like Pat Summitt, for example, the former head coach of the University of Tennessee's women's basketball team. Summitt is a college basketball legend and currently holds the title of winningest basketball coach throughout the entire NCAA. She actually has about 100 more career wins than the top male basketball coach. I have found that although women have come close, they're just not given the same kinds of opportunities coaching men in sports as men have been given coaching women in sports. Gender segregation, something that we learn as children at an early age, stays rooted into our ideological understanding of gender roles and the subjectivity of females as leaders. Since men's sports have historically been more lucrative for coaches than women's sports, the head coaching position in the men's division has also been idealized within sports culture, signifying a coach's ability to reach the highest obtainable level in their career. Through the research I have conducted surrounding the head coaching position, it becomes clear that there needs to be significant institutionalized changes on multiple different levels in order to make the far-reaching fantasy of coaching at the highest level into a reality for female basketball coaches.